Building trust with donors can happen in a lot of different ways. And one of that is showing up in media, showing up in news articles, on TV in your local area, online when they're browsing their favorite publication. And the way to get there is through press releases and building media relations. And this is often something that we don't think about when it comes to our organization. We just see other nonprofits being featured in the media, but don't really know how they got there or why we're not the ones being featured. And it starts with conversations, and it starts with sending out really well-crafted press releases. So my guest today, Mickie Kennedy, is here to talk to us about how to start that process, how to get going with PR, how to increase your visibility locally and even nationally so that you can get more media attention, build more trust with your potential donors or potential audience or existing audience, and really just get more visibility and brand awareness for your organization. Mickie Kennedy founded eReleases 25 years ago to help small businesses, authors, and startups increase their visibility and credibility through Tier 1 press release distribution. And he lives in the Baltimore area. So he's sharing some great examples of how to think about your press releases and how to get people to see them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I am so excited about this topic because we haven't really talked about PR at all on this podcast, which is a shame. So before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by our July freebie, our July free resource, which is 9 ways to steward your donors and thank them. Some fun, creative ways to get in front of them, to have conversation with them, to engage with them, connect with them on a regular basis, to say thank you so that you can really build on that relationship and connection. So you can go to thefirstclick.net/resources, grab that download or any of the other downloads that we have released this year that might help you where you're at with your organization. So again, thefirstclick.net/resources. Make sure you grab it today. And let's get into the episode. You're listening to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern. Each month, we dive deep into a digital marketing or fundraising strategy that you can implement in your organization. Each week, you'll hear from guest experts, nonprofits, and myself on best practices, tips, and resources to help you raise more money online and reach your organizational goals. Hey friends, please join me in welcoming Mickie Kennedy to the podcast. Mickie, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'm excited about this topic because we've actually never talked PR and press releases on this podcast, which I think is crazy. So I'm excited to have you share all of your nuggets of wisdom. But because it is a newer topic to our audience, well, maybe not to our audience, but to our podcast, I would love if you could just maybe share a little bit about PR, what press releases are, and, as we've talked via email, kind of why they're an underutilized and underused marketing platform.
Sure. So a press release is just an announcement, usually written in the third person that's sent to the media. You might have quotes in there where you can talk in the first person. And it's basically you're sharing what you feel is a newsworthy announcement to the media. And it could be around a particular event or an award. Or there's just hundreds, if not thousands, of endless, things that could be ripe for sending out a press release. Generally, you do want it to be sort of meaningful, something that you feel is important not only to your organization, but also has the potential of getting the interest of the media. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the area that a lot of people aren't very good at. And so they're good at sort of like, hey, this is important to us. We want to draw attention to this issue, but you also have to realize that the journalist is trying to decide, does this rise enough in newsworthiness for me to want to share it with my audience? Is it going to, either entertain or educate, or sometimes both for their audience? And what could you do to make it more meaningful? And one of the things that I think that a lot of people forget is journalists are storytellers. And how does your announcement fit into a story arc? And so sometimes you have, here's this event that's very important to us, and we would love to get a lot of people to show up for the event, to support it, make donations, things like that. But what stories could you put in there that would make people be interested in this? And I think one of the easiest things is what's the journey, the story of how the organization came to be. I mean, often these are inspirational. It's usually about a founder who has a personal relationship to an issue, but not always. But that could be a way to really draw someone in, give them a human interest element, that immediate empathy that happens, and that could possibly be something that you could add to the release. It doesn't have to be the main announcement, but maybe as the paragraphs come down, you start to talk about the organization, how it came to be, because generally there is a meaningful story there. There is something that will really resonate with people and make people sort of feel a relationship or this emotional response as a result, and that's very valuable. And journalists know that. They know that is a way to get activate their audience, and therefore they're more likely to cover that.
Yeah. Well, I have so many questions, but so I'm trying to figure out where I want to go first, because I love everything that you said, and that's so in alignment with kind of how we teach people marketing in general, right? Like, we want to tell stories, we want to connect with people on an emotional level. And so when we're sending these press releases out to media, I think there's a couple different ways that they utilize it, right? Like, one might be a straight copy paste to their publication if maybe they have like an online, well, they all have online versions of their publications and whatnot, but it also might be something that encourages them to reach out to you to develop a bigger story. Am I correct in that? Or are there other ways that these press releases might be utilized that we want to think about when we're crafting them?
Yeah, so journalists generally will take a release, and usually they draft it. They'll put it in their own words. They'll write it. If there's a quote in there, they'll usually use that. And for that reason, the quote's the one area where you completely get to control your messaging.
Mm-hmm.
And so you definitely want to make sure that you say something that is strong enough or concise enough or emotional enough, or it stands on its own in a way that a journalist would want to use it. A lot of times quotes get written as if they're like, I don't know, written by committee, where they're so safe they don't really say anything meaningful.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to ensure that your quote gets, a red line through it, not by the journalist writing the article, but the managing editor. And that's a huge loss, because you could have completely controlled the messaging of that quote. And as a result, it would have been included basically verbatim. And so spend a little time on the quote. What makes a great quote? It varies. It could be like, sometimes the colorful language that you use if you're a wordsmith, but more likely it's just that you said something very condensed and powerful, or meaningful, or you just reached in and it was, emotionally gripping. And that those are the best quotes. And, if your quote doesn't do that, go back and lean on it and spend a lot of time in it, because it's a place where you can really, go in, say something really strong and powerful, and then maybe incorporate a small call to action, like, wow, we have, I'm saying something very strong, powerful. This is why it's so important that people support this. And you got that out. And then you could say something like, and we're just reaching out to the community for them to learn more about us and start contributing today. And that little bit of call to action, if it follows a really strong sentence, stands a chance that the quote completely will remain intact, and you get that little bit of call to action in an article that they write about you. It is true that journalists can reach out to you and get more information to build out a different story, but many times, if you sent the right press release, the information's there. They may have to go to the website to get a little bit more contextual information, but they rarely go back to you for more information, unless they need clarification, or if they're sort of going on a tangent or something related to it. Generally, you want to make sure that you have enough information in the press release, on your website, that they can draft an article on their own, because busy journalists, they hate having to tie up loose ends to get a clarification, or to, expand on something or make sure that they are understanding something completely.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding you, is the to increase your likelihood in getting your press release published, make it as easy on the journalist as possible. Clear information, great storytelling, and alignment with kind of who their audience is.
Yeah. And I know that when it comes to nonprofits and things like that, that they're doing so much good that things get talked about in generalities. And I always tell people that, you're going to have the biggest impact in a message when you make it very personal.
Mm-hmm.
And often those are individuals. So I know that not every organization is comfortable talking about individuals that they help, but many individuals that have been helped by nonprofits are, advocates as a result of it, and they're very willing to share their story and their relationship with a nonprofit. So if you can capture some of those stories, I think building them out on your website is a great way for even people who visit you to really get that emotional response, that empathy, that amplification, and then also occasionally include it in the actual press releases. Not a litany of people, but maybe just touch on one. But maybe you could cite for more individuals, case studies that we've helped over the years. Click here. It's a really great way to sort of stand out, and it really helps that story arc that people are looking for. So don't discount the individual story, and think about as you continue to help whether it's individuals or other organizations or whatever, are there stories that you can capture over the years as you're helping people and record that, because it really becomes a valuable asset that anybody new to the organization, what are we about? Go to this page. We're about helping lots of people, and these are examples of just the significance we make individual by individual.
I love that. And you're speaking my language. Yeah, let's repurpose and use this stuff in as many places as we can. I think that's great. Okay, so I want to touch on then, like, if we've crafted these press releases, like, how do we know who to send them to? Like, how do we kind of start that process of maybe building our media list or our connections?
Right. So I think when it comes to nonprofits, look locally. Local media is some of the easiest media for people to cultivate. If you think about it, there's probably less than a dozen people who would write about you in your local market. It's possible it's a bit more if you're in a really large market, like maybe Chicago. But here in the Baltimore area, there's it's a small pond of places that you could possibly get written about. Find the journalist who covers nonprofits and organizations like yours, and just reach out and get their email address. It could be online. But you could have to make a phone call and ask for their email address. And it's just like, can I get this person's email address? I'm with a nonprofit. We have a really good story that we're working on, and I just wanted to pitch that person. You don't need a press release for this, but a pitch of a few sentences, maybe a paragraph. But I do think that it's worth building a really strong quote and adding that, because I've already told you the value of a strong quote. A journalist can envision the article around it. And so a strong quote is a huge foundation for them to work with. And so if the pitch is good and there's an amazing quote, you stand a very high likelihood of getting picked up. And you can just sort of do that pitching naturally as you have these milestones. Local newspaper is the obvious one. Business magazine or business newspapers, if you're fortunate to have those. There's consumer magazines, like we have one called Baltimore, that would be appropriate. Then look at TV and radio. Are there segments that occasionally highlight organizations and nonprofits? If that segment's on the evening news, reach out and say, hey, I saw that you did a segment last week profiling this organization. I represent a nonprofit. I would love to pitch something similar in the future. Who is the producer of booker of that particular segment? And again, say, I'm really looking for their email address so that I can pitch them in a few weeks when I've got something that I'm working on coming together. And again, just build that Rolodex. And once you have it, it's just natural. It's just reaching out like that. then there's always national news as well. For that, you can continue the same thing that you're doing locally, nationally, but it gets cumbersome and it's a lot of work. And so I think that in those cases, a newswire works really well.
Mhm.
In the US, there's basically a duopoly. There's two
Yeah.
major newswires that account for the majority of press releases, and that's PR Newswire and Business Wire. E-releases that I work with, we work with PR Newswire. All of the releases that go out through e-releases get a national distribution on PR Newswire. They charge between $1,600 and $2,000 for a 600, 700 word press release. Through us, it's like a quarter of that, maybe a third of the price. And we do have a nonprofit discount called CauseWire that again includes that national distribution at a huge savings. We do a lot of releases. We do 10,000 to 12,000 a year, so we have a really good rate with the Newswire. But even more importantly, the Newswire saw that we were supporting smaller organizations, smaller businesses. And they knew that their salespeople would never be attracted to these people because they're chasing people who are like, oh, yeah, $25,000 newsroom a year, add that. $30,000 for a database and all this global stuff. Yeah, add that. And my clients are like, our budget is like 4 releases a year, $2,000. And so it's not a customer base that they're looking for, but they liked that if we were the intermediary and we provided their support and just sent the releases with them, that it made a lot of sense working together like that. So it is something that is really great because if you have a meaningful message, it can really go large. I have on the website ereleases.com. My leading case study was something that was set up during the early part of the pandemic called Dining Bond Initiative. It was basically mostly a grassroots project to sort of get money to restaurants that were closed during the pandemic. And the way it worked is you nominated a favorite local restaurant. If the volunteer was able to get a hold of that restaurant, money would be donated that would go directly to them to help them during, the 2 weeks, that we were sent home to flatten the curve.
Yeah.
And then it would be backed sort of like through a dining bond, what they called it, but really a gift certificate. But they like the dining bond thing because they sort of modeled it after war bond initiatives. But it got over 100 articles in many of them in daily newspapers. But it also got picked up in a lot of major publications as well. Included the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Harvard Business Review, Bloomberg, Forbes, Reuters, but also food trades, as well as we quit counting at like 100 pickups, but so many daily papers picked it up, generated in excess of $10 million to help restaurants. And the release would have cost like $350, but we did it for free to help the initiative during that time. And that was all they did, one release. And so it really shows you that if you have a meaningful message that resonates, it can go really large and wide on a newswire, and that's the real value of it. I think it did so well because we were afraid. We were sent home. We didn't know a lot, and this was positive news. This was something that was really good, and also we were home, and we were didn't feel very enabled. And here was something that we could do. It was actually a small action that we controlled where we could give $40 to the restaurant we always go to on our anniversary, or something that's meaningful to us in our community. And I think that if you can tap into something like that, that really resonates emotionally, because that was sort of the messaging that they did, is like, here is something that you at home can do to help your local pizza place, or a place that you go to with your family on a routine basis. And I think that that's what made it so actionable, and why the media really responded the way they did.
Yeah, I love like right time, right place, right message. Right, that's kind of the magic sauce. But I want to go back to a mindset thing in alignment with kind of this outreach and the cultivation and the nurturing of your media contacts. And then I think a lot of times we feel like if we are calling, or we are reaching out, or we are pitching, that we're maybe being annoying, or they don't want to hear from us. But especially in this day and age when content is being created all the time and people are consuming things all the time, journalists are looking for that information, right? So I think it's
Right.
not by accident that that nonprofit gets to be on that TV show, right? They probably asked or pitched because journalists don't have time to go out and find all of the content that they need for their publication or their TV station. So, can you maybe talk through a little bit mindset stuff with regards to building that confidence to reach out and knowing that they're actually looking, like they're hungry for more stories to share?
Right. So yeah, I mean, if as you reach out, locally to the market, I mean, a lot of people are like, "Can I just ask for their email address?" And it's like, yeah, they're members of the community. They're members of the media. They should be accessible. If they're not, that's kind of strange.
Yeah.
And these aren't celebrities. These are journalists, and they should be accessible. You should be able to reach them. If not, and they have a lot of gatekeeping, that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
And I haven't had problems with people. There are some that don't like the email; they prefer a phone call. I don't think there's any that probably prefer faxing this day and age. But if they have a preference that's outside the norm, try to adapt to it. Yeah, and reach them the way that they prefer. It's not unusual to do this. Reaching out to them every other month or at a minimum quarterly, and nothing really happened for like 6 to 9 months. It really is. What you'll find is after a while, you pitch them 3, 4 times or so, you are going to come and be in the front of their mind, and
Mhm.
all of a sudden they're going to be working on a story, and they're looking to plug in a local organization, and they're going to think of you, and you're going to find them contacting you out of the blue and say, "Hey, I'm working on the story about X, Y, and Z. I thought about your organization. Are you guys doing anything like that? Or, are you are you seeing this trend in the community where this is happening to nonprofits?" And you're like, "Yeah, you can go, oh yeah, I would love to talk about that. Could I, get a few minutes together and get some quotes and some information
Mhm.
from my team, and then get back to you?" I always, when people put you on the spot and they just want a quote, it's like you just like, now I've shut down. So and these people are writers, so they know. So just say, hey, could I get some of the questions that you want to ask? I'll prepare some responses, and then I'd be willing to talk to you. Or if you just wanted me to email those over, and then make it your mission to sort of have some meaningful language and a great quote in regards to that, and see if you can accomplish that so that you can get inserted in there. And as you do this and you reach out, there's a familiarity, and after a while, you will find that you will start to get picked up. And the Baltimore Sun is in my backyard, basically, and I've always wondered why the same companies get plugged into articles. It's like, hey, there's this HR culture problems, people wanting to do hybrid or working from home still and don't want to go back into the office, and all of a sudden they plug in the same company
Mhm.
that I've seen routinely. And it's not that they're advertisers or they're paying for that. It's just because they've established a relationship, and they've established that they're reliable and responsive when a journalist is under deadline, and make it easy for them to get in there. And they also know that the journalist is looking for quotes that are really going to resonate and speak to the situation, and they know that they're just a go-to, and that's why they get plugged in, and you see them 2 or 3 times a year in the Baltimore Sun
Yeah.
on various different issues, and it makes it very easy to get that visibility, and it also makes it easy so that when you have something that's really important to you, you can send them a pitch, but you can also just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I know that I've helped you out, last year with a couple of articles. I sent that email over to you. It would be so meaningful if you could find a way." And they are people, and they're like, "Yeah, you've helped me out a couple of times." You apply a little bit of pressure. It takes a little finesse to know what's appropriate, but they will return the favor. And if you apply a little bit maybe not even pressure, but just saying, this is so meaningful to us. This is our biggest driver of the year, or this is, so important to the organization. Is there any way that we could make this meaningful to your audience that it would interest you in writing an article? So you're basically saying, I have something that's so important to me. Is there a way that we could make it important to your audience? Tell me what I need to add to this that would really resonate. And he's like, maybe you could do a mention of someone in the community that you've helped, or maybe you could, do all these different things. They'll sometimes come to you and say, I feel like what's missing is this. And then you could go, I'm going to fill that in and get back to you. And so, I think that that's one of the things that does require a little bit of being proactive. It makes it very difficult for people like me who are shy English majors. I did, if you told me 27 years ago, I'm doing podcasts and I'm reaching out to journalists and having conversations that I was not invited by them to have, people, I would say that's crazy, but you adapt. You realize what's important, and this is part of the job. I mean, PR and communications is one of those things where you're going to have to be proactive. You're going to have to put yourself out there, do baby steps, start with a smaller publication that is less important, and, really practice and do things like that. So it is something that I think that is a skill set that anyone can acquire. And even a shy English major can eventually get to the point that they're comfortable doing it. But it's just part of what needs to be done. Communication is so important. Journalists are so busy. They're, there's no, it's no secret that a lot of the media world is expected to do more with less. There are writers and journalists who are used to be able to enjoy having a whole week to write a great article. And now they're expected to do, 3 or 5 articles a week. Yeah. And, and they used to have people who would do the research for them. And now they're just all on their own. And so they're just expected to produce and produce. And so anything that you can do to bring a compelling story to them and, have it put together a little bit with a quote and some reasoned thoughts and language is going to make it very easy for them to consider and just quickly incorporate that into something that they're working on.
Yeah. So I had a similar experience in a past job where I got thrown into kind of media relations and PR. And we had our traditional press releases that would go out. It was product-based business. And so every time we launched a new product or whatever, won an award, we'd send out a press release. But we were a smaller fish in this product pond and definitely didn't have the biggest market share. But similar to what you're saying, because we treated the media really well, because we responded to their inquiries immediately, because we had great quality photography and good messaging, they would come to us and say, hey, we have this random spot that's open for this product, best blah, blah, blah. It was a guitar company. So best concert body guitars. We've got a spot. Can you get us something tomorrow? Because they knew that we would. And those spots, people don't realize, are often paid for product placement. And we would often get things like that for free because they knew they could come to us in a pinch. They knew our product was good and they knew that we would get them high quality stuff right away. And so if you feel like I think that goes a long way in just that nurturing and relationship building. So I'm so glad that you brought that up because that was an experience that we had as well. And we got way more placement than we ever should have just because of how we kind of interacted with, and not every single publication, but the key ones that we knew were really going to get us the most traction. And so I think similar to how you are building relationships with your major stakeholders and your larger donors, the same is true. It's the same exact type of experience with media. You're just delivering something different. So I think that's also, for your introvert side, way to think about how we're building these conversations and relationships. It's no different. You're delivering value to this journalist who needs something. And if you can provide that better than anyone else, you'll get picked up more.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so good. Okay. Well, Mickie, we've talked through kind of the basics of what should be in a press release. We've talked about kind of how to go out and find people, upgrading to the PR newswire when you have something really, really impactful and great to share. How often do we maybe want to think about issuing a press release or putting a press release out there? I mean, I know it's not a matter of like do it once a quarter, like it needs to be around something that makes sense, but kind of what might be a good regular cadence to think about when we're crafting these.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the milestones and the
Mhm.
things that you're working on. I think that if you are working on lots of projects and you're doing a lot of activity, then you probably are going to have more milestones worthy of doing a press release. If you're like a smaller organization and maybe you have a annual fundraising event and you have you win an award or something like that occasionally, then your cadence might be a couple of times a year. I do tell people to try to stretch and see if there's potentially, other types of opportunities that you could put together. Sometimes they can, revolve around, uh, you know, uh, doing a survey or study is a great way to sort of stand out. I mean, if there's a community that you serve, is there a survey of that community that you could do that would strike, get the interest of perhaps maybe national media attention? And then, when it comes to reaching that community, there's lots of ways to do that. Sometimes there's organizations that people belong to, or there's things like the YMCA that has a national presence that sometimes will reach out into their databases and communicate surveys. Just think outside the box of the people that you're trying to serve, or the community that you're looking at, and if you're wanting to reach them through a survey, what are the alliances that many of them hold that would be willing to potentially send out a survey for you. I find that a lot of times when you approach these organizations and say, hey, we're working on this survey in our community that we serve, and is it possible you could send this link to your members, because we feel that's a really good kinship or alignment with our community, and as a result we'll put you in the press release that we'll be
Mm.
issuing over the wire. That gives them an opportunity for media attention as well. And again, if a lot of these organizations aren't necessarily ones that do get a lot of media attention, so a lot of them will see it as a win-win. Sometimes I've had them push back and say, could we co-brand the survey? And I was
Right.
like, as long as they don't start to like rewrite a lot of the questions and things like that, I don't see a problem with that. A lot of times it can actually even improve your visibility by being aligned with an organization that
Hmm.
has a pool of your the community that you're serving. But the great thing about these surveys is, if you ask really meaningful and timely questions and you get responses, often the media is like, yeah, we would love to write an article about that, because our audience would love to know right now how they feel about this particular issue.
Yeah.
And so it really is coming up with really good questions right now. But then you put that in a press release, you share the numbers. I often tell people, build out a page on your website dedicated to that survey, put all the questions and answers, make it a resource rich page, include a link to it in the press release. Generally the press releases don't focus on all the questions. You're going to pick the highlight questions, the
Hmm.
most surprising, the shocking ones. You're going to provide the analysis of why you believe that the people who completed the survey felt that way, and you're going to have an amazing quote. You're the people who authored the survey, and it's really going to elevate you and put you in a position of as an expert,
Hmm.
an industry organization, and it's a great way to get a lot of visibility. And it usually does really well on a national level, because you're the author of this data, and the media loves data. So that's one of the things to think about, even when you're doing an announcement that's not survey centric. If you can find instances of publicly available data and put it in there, things about the community that you serve, and data points that sort of reinforce the necessity for what you do, that really shows the stakes
Yeah.
and the reasons why you exist, and that really makes an audience care more. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to people saying, by pointing out that 67% of people in this community often suffer from, a crisis at least once in their life that, makes them unhoused or something like that. Something that's specific, that's just a number that's out there. It really does resonate. And the journalist knows that's a number that's going to make my audience, stand up and pay attention to this and to this issue and make them care more. And so, look for elements like that. Look for opportunities to, really, cover something in your industry or your community that a lot of people perhaps haven't talked about. And it's easy for things just to get ignored and not put in the media. And a lot of times you can be the person to take that blind spot and put a spotlight on it and bring it to the media. And all of a sudden the media goes, oh, wow, we haven't really talked about this aspect of this issue. And all of a sudden that gets a lot of resonance. I find that, examining blind spots or gaps in your community that the media is not talking about is often an area where you can really get a lot of people's attention, because it is true that if you go to a conference and you're talking to other people who serve your community, there are things that you're going to talk about. You're like, hey, I've been waiting for this conference because are you experiencing this? And you're like, yeah, we're experiencing that as well. And you're looking for confirmation because no one else is talking about it. And it's not in publications and other things. And all of a sudden that could be something that if you put a spotlight on it, the media is going to say, wow, we haven't really noticed that, or we haven't really reported on that. And all of a sudden you can get a flurry of activity as a result of that.
I love that. That's so good. Okay, well, Mickie, if by now people aren't convinced that PR is something that they should be considering and starting to implement, doesn't mean it has to be everything, but just starting to get that in there and get the juices flowing. Kind of as we wrap this up, any final words or advice that you'd love to share as we kind of jump into this world of PR?
Right. I think the biggest thing is, don't let your size or your inexperience be a deterrent. A lot of people feel like PR and media attention is something that the big organizations and well-funded nonprofits and have access to, and the media wouldn't be interested in you. But the truth is, the large, well-funded places, people generally know about them.
Mm-hmm.
And so journalists don't get a lot of accolades for covering them, but journalists do get support from their audience, whether it's readers or viewers, often when they profile an organization that nobody knows about, and they share that story. And so as a result, sometimes being unknown and being really small can be an advantage, because journalists like to be seen as curators, and they like to share organizations that are doing something a little bit different and that people don't necessarily know. So, don't feel that just because of your size or a lack of experience or, lack of funds is going to be a huge deterrent, because I really don't think it will. I actually think it can be like a superpower for people, and people just don't realize it. And then another thing just to keep in mind is that, focusing on more strategic types of releases and messaging is really going to give you a huge advantage. I'm the first to admit that 90% of press releases that go out, even the ones that go out through me, don't generate any earned media. And I think the reason for that is that people do the types of releases that they see everywhere else. I mean, we even have templates on our website, and they're very cookie cutter. So, look for opportunities to take a cookie cutter release and inject personality into it, whether it's your, the organization's, story, whether it's sharing vulnerabilities of people you've helped, and their story, whether it's getting data points and putting in there, but really look for the opportunity to give elements in a press release that's going to make a journalist say, I can build more of a story arc here. I can get my audience to care. And, getting an audience to care is a really powerful thing. And producing an article that your audience cares about is a very positive experience. And so put those elements in your press release and in your copy. I do have a free masterclass on strategic types of releases. It's less than an hour long, so it's like not a big commitment, but it's a great place for someone to get started if they're considering PR, because these are the types of releases that generally get picked up. And it's at ereleases.com/plan, PLAN. And again, it's completely free. And as I also mentioned, we do have CauseWire, which is a nonprofit rate for people who are interested in using e-releases.
Yeah. Well, Mickie, thanks for sharing that free webinar. That's amazing. So definitely go check that out. But if people want to connect with you more, learn more just about e-releases in general, they can go to e-releases. But where else can they connect with you?
So all of our social media is on the lower right of our website, ereleases.com. It's a direct link to my LinkedIn, probably the only social media that I know well and
Yep.
I'm active on. But also feel free to call or email or chat on our website. We don't have any salespeople; it's just editors, and we're really good at walking people through the process. And if someone ever has a release, they just want us to look at it. Feel free to email it to us. Give us 1 to 2 business days to get back to you, but we'll review it, let you know our thoughts. If there's some obvious ways to improve it, we'll let you know. And again, that's whether you work with us or not, just one of the things that we do to help out organizations.
I love that. That's so generous. That's amazing. Well, we'll also have all of the links and everything at the on the show notes at thefirstclick.net/266. So you can grab everything there. Mickie, this was amazing. We'll have to have you back and do a deep dive on some of these topics, because I know we talked briefly just about a lot of things with press releases. So I'm sure there'll be more questions. But thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so are you convinced that it's time to start implementing public relations and PR press releases into your strategy? And if you are already doing that, I hope you got some good takeaways as far as how to improve it and how to think about ways to continue to connect and chat with the media. The media are not scary people. I love how he said, they're not famous. They're public figures. They're here to support the community, and they're looking for content. So again, you can grab all of the information at thefirstclick.net/266. We'll have all the resources and the free webinar that Mickie mentioned, which is awesome. I can't wait to check it out myself. For now, make sure you're subscribed and leave us a review while you're there so that we can get a little bit more visibility for this podcast and get in front of more nonprofits that could use some digital marketing support. I so appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode. Thank you so much for just being you and the work that you're doing in the community. For now, again, show notes at thefirstclick.net/266, and I'll see you in the next one.